The year is 1911. A biting wind, typical of early autumn in Vermont, swept through Blackwood Creek, rattling the windows of Elinor Hayes' small ancestral home. The air, usually crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, carried an unsettling undertone, a faint metallic clang that was as familiar as it was unnerving. It was the sound of the old church bells, ringing. They had been ringing for 13 years now, ever since the inexplicably tragic night her parents disappeared, a night shrouded in local whispers and hushed theories. Elinor, barely in her 20s, stood by the window, a hand pressed against the cold glass. Her reflection, pale and etched with a quiet determination, stared back. The bells. They were a constant, a chilling soundtrack to her solitary existence. They rang at odd hours, sometimes a single mournful toll, sometimes a rapid, frantic peal that echoed through the valley, sending shivers down the spines of the superstitious townsfolk. The old church, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky, stood abandoned on the hill overlooking Blackwood Creek. Its steeple, a broken finger pointing to the heavens, was a testament to a forgotten tragedy. "Elinor, dear, are you still by that window?" Her Aunt Martha's voice, a thin, reedy sound, cut through the silence of the parlor. Martha had moved in after the disappearance of Elinor's parents, bringing with her an overbearing protectiveness and a rigid adherence to tradition. "Come away from there. Those bells are nothing but trouble. Always have been." Elinor sighed, turning from the window. "They're not trouble, Aunt Martha. They're a mystery. And they started the very night Mama and Papa vanished." Martha shuddered, her thin lips pressing into a disapproving line. "Don't speak of it, child. Some things are best left undisturbed." But Elinor couldn't leave it undisturbed, not anymore. The whispers in town had intensified lately, fueled by the bell's increasingly erratic rhythm. Some claimed it was the restless spirits of the missing trying to communicate. Others, the more practical, spoke of a mechanical fault, despite numerous attempts by the town's elders to silence them. But no one had ever truly investigated. No one dared. Later that evening, after Aunt Martha had retired to her room, Elinor found herself drawn to her mother's old writing desk. It was a beautiful piece, made of dark, polished oak, and it smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, a pang of longing in her chest. Her mother, a quiet woman with an inquisitive mind, had spent countless hours at this desk. A small, leather-bound journal lay tucked beneath a stack of old letters. Elinor pulled it out, her heart quickening. Her mother's familiar handwriting adorned the cover. Notes on the unexplained. Inside, the pages were filled with meticulous observations, sketches, and cryptic entries. And then she found it, an entry dated the very day her parents disappeared. The bells. A new pattern tonight. Not random. A message. The silence before. So unsettling. He knows. He's been watching the church. The key. Where is the key? Elinor's breath hitched. He knows. Who was he? And what key? The entry was unsettling, hinting at a hidden truth far darker than any local superstition. The silence her mother mentioned, had it been a prelude to something terrible? The bells had started ringing after the silence, after the disappearance. This journal wasn't just idle musings. It was a desperate plea from the past, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to an unimaginable truth. The cold dread that had settled in her stomach since childhood now transformed into a burning need for answers. She wasn't just a curious young woman anymore. She was a detective, compelled by a mother's desperate message from beyond the grave. The mystery of the bells was not just a town oddity, it was personal. She closed the journal, her fingers tracing the worn leather. The faint sound of the bells drifted in through the window, no longer just an annoyance, but a haunting call to action. The next morning, the grey skies of Vermont seemed to mirror Elinor's mood, a somber canvas hiding a storm within. She walked purposefully through the town, the chill wind biting at her cheeks. The houses, mostly clapboard and stone, stood like sentinels along the winding streets, their windows dark and unseeing. Blackwood Creek was a town built on secrets, its quaint facade barely concealing the undercurrent of fear and superstition that permeated the air. Every resident seemed to carry a burden, a shared silence about the church and its haunting chimes. Her destination was the town library, a modest brick building that housed not just books, but also the town's history, meticulously preserved by Thomas, the young librarian. Thomas, with his spectacles perched on his nose and a perpetually curious gleam in his eyes, was an anomaly in Blackwood Creek. He was an outsider, having moved from Boston a few years prior, and his fascination with local folklore made him a valuable, albeit unusual, ally. She found him behind the counter, dusting a shelf of old tomes. He looked up, a welcoming smile illuminating his face. "Elinor, a rare sight at this hour. What brings you to these hallowed halls?" "Trouble, Thomas," she said, pulling out the journal from her satchel. "Or perhaps answers." She laid the journal open on the counter, pointing to the cryptic entry. "My mother wrote this, the day she disappeared. The bells. He knows. The key. Do you have any idea what this could mean?" Thomas's smile faded, replaced by a look of intense concentration. He picked up the journal, his brow furrowed as he read. "This is fascinating, Elinor, and disturbing. Your mother was a very private woman, but I always suspected she had a keen mind. He knows. It suggests a person, not a supernatural entity." He paused, tapping his finger thoughtfully against the page. "And the key. It could be a literal key or something metaphorical, a key to understanding a puzzle." "I think it's literal," Elinor said, her voice low. She was always very precise in her notes, and she mentioned the church. Thomas's eyes lit up. "The church, of course. It's been abandoned since the incident, as they call it. The official story is a fire. But no one ever believed that. There were whispers of a collapse, a stampede, something terrible happening during a service. No bodies were ever found, just a few scattered belongings and an empty building." "My parents were at that service," Elinor stated, her voice barely a whisper. "They were among the disappeared." Thomas looked at her with new understanding, a shared sense of loss and urgency. "Elinor, this changes everything. If your mother was investigating something connected to the church and the bells, then we need to find out what it was. We need to go to the church." A surge of fear, cold and sharp, ran through Elinor. The church. It was a forbidden place, whispered about in hushed tones, avoided by everyone in Blackwood Creek. But the thought of her mother, bravely pursuing a truth that ultimately consumed her, steeled Elinor's resolve. "I agree," she said, her voice firm. "But we need to be careful. My aunt, the town, they won't approve." Thomas nodded gravely. "We'll be discreet. Meet me tomorrow evening after dark at the old path behind Miller's farm. It leads directly to the church, unseen from the main road." As Elinor walked home, the bells began to toll again, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to follow her every step. But this time, they didn't just fill her with dread. They filled her with a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. The mystery, which had been a suffocating weight for so long, was finally beginning to yield its secrets. And she was ready to face whatever lay hidden within the shadows of Blackwood Creek. The storm within her was beginning to brew. Remember to subscribe to the channel to follow Elinor's journey into the chilling mystery of Blackwood Creek. This is a fictional story, The following evening, a thick, oppressive fog rolled into Blackwood Creek, clinging to the ancient trees and shrouding the distant hills in a ghostly white veil. It was the kind of night that made shadows dance and whispers seem to carry on the wind. Elinor, bundled in a heavy wool coat, shivered, but not just from the cold. The church, unseen but ever present in her thoughts, loomed. She met Thomas at the designated spot, a gnarled oak tree at the edge of Miller's farm. He was already there, a lantern clutched in his gloved hand, its feeble light battling the encroaching darkness. "You made it," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Good. The fog is a blessing and a curse. It hides us, but it also makes everything feel heavier." "I'm ready," Elinor replied, though her stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The old path was overgrown, brambles snagging at their clothes, and the air grew colder as they ascended the gentle slope. The faint rhythmic clang of the church bells seemed to intensify with every step, no longer just a distant echo, but a palpable presence, a pulse beating in the heart of the darkness. As they approached the church, its silhouette emerged from the swirling mist, a hulking, ruined mass. The wooden doors, once grand, hung askew on rusted hinges, gaping like an open maw. The stained glass windows, many shattered, resembled hollow eyes staring out into the void. A cold draught swept through the interior, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. A faint metallic odor that Elinor couldn't quite place. "It looks worse than I imagined," Elinor whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas nodded, his face illuminated by the dancing light of the lantern. "It's been untouched for years. Local legend says it's cursed. That's why no one bothers to go inside." They stepped over the threshold, their footsteps echoing eerily in the vast, empty nave. Dust motes danced in the lantern's beam, illuminated against the impenetrable gloom. Pews lay overturned, hymnals scattered across the floor, their pages brittle and yellowed. The air was thick with a palpable sense of abandonment, of lives abruptly halted. "The bells, they sound closer in here," Elinor observed, her voice trembling slightly. The rhythmic clanging was now a resonant thrum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stone walls. Thomas walked towards the altar, his gaze sweeping across the dilapidated interior. They must be controlled from the belfry, of course, but how are they ringing without anyone up there? He shone the lantern upwards, revealing the dark, cavernous space above them, where a trapdoor, presumably leading to the belfry, lay bolted shut. Elinor, meanwhile, had begun to examine the walls, her eyes searching for anything unusual. The plaster was crumbling in places, revealing the rough stone beneath. Near what would have been the altar, she noticed something odd, a section of the wall where the plaster seemed newer, less aged than the rest. She ran her fingers over it, feeling a faint seam. "Thomas, look here. This patch. It's different." Thomas knelt beside her, examining the area. "You're right. It's almost like it was repaired, but poorly. What do you think is behind it?" A jolt of intuition, sharp and undeniable, went through Elinor. "The key," she murmured. "My mother mentioned the key. What if it's not a literal key, but a clue, a piece of information hidden away?" Her eyes darted around, searching for anything that might suggest a hiding place. The floorboards creaked under their weight, the only sound apart from the incessant clang of the bells. As they investigated the wall, a sudden piercing shriek cut through the silence outside, followed by a series of frantic barks. Elinor and Thomas froze, their heads snapping towards the broken front doors. "What was that?" Elinor whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for Thomas's arm. "Sounds like a dog," Thomas replied, his voice strained, but it sounded pained and close. The bells, which had maintained a steady rhythm, suddenly began to clang erratically, a frantic, jumbled cacophony that seemed to echo the fear seizing their hearts. The light from Thomas's lantern flickered, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. A low growl, distinctly animalistic, emanated from the darkness beyond the open doors. "We should go," Elinor urged, her voice barely a whisper. The sense of dread that had been building since they entered the church now reached a crescendo. This wasn't just an abandoned building. It felt like a living entity, its secrets guarding themselves with a fierce, unseen hand. Thomas hesitated, torn between his desire to investigate further and the obvious danger. But the growl intensified, closer now, accompanied by a heavy thud, as if something large had just landed on the stone floor outside. "You're right," he said, his voice tight. "We're not armed for whatever that is." He grabbed Elinor's hand. "Let's use the back exit. There's a small door near the vestry." They moved quickly, their hearts pounding against their ribs. As they reached the small, dilapidated wooden door, a shadow detached itself from the gloom near the main entrance. It was large, indistinct, and moved with a predatory grace. A pair of glowing eyes, yellow and malevolent, fixed on them from the darkness. "Run, Elinor," Thomas yelled, yanking the door open. They burst out into the swirling fog, scrambling down the overgrown path, the frantic, jumbled ringing of the bells and the menacing growls echoing behind them. The cold air bit at their lungs, but the fear spurred them onward. They didn't look back, not daring to glance at whatever malevolent presence lurked within the ruined church. The mystery was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, and the bells, once a mere enigma, now sounded like a warning, a desperate cry for them to stop. The chilling encounter had shifted the entire investigation, transforming it from a quest for answers into a desperate flight for survival. The bells, once a source of intellectual curiosity, now seemed to mock their courage, a relentless reminder of the lurking peril. They didn't stop running until the flickering lights of Blackwood Creek's main street became visible through the swirling fog. Their lungs burned, and Elinor's legs ached, but the adrenaline still coursed through her veins, a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. Thomas, breathing heavily, leaned against a lamppost, his face pale in the dim glow. "What was that?" Elinor gasped, clutching her side. The image of those glowing yellow eyes was burned into her mind. "I don't know," Thomas admitted, shaking his head. "It was large, certainly, and fast. Not a typical wild animal, not around here anyway." He paused, catching his breath. "Did you notice the bells? They changed their pattern when it appeared, almost like a warning." Elinor nodded, shivering. "Yes, from a steady ring to a frantic cacophony. It was terrifying." She thought of the patch of newer plaster on the church wall, the sensation of the seam. "We almost had something, Thomas. The wall, near the altar. It felt disturbed, like something was hidden behind it." Thomas's eyes widened. "You're right. We were so close. And then that appeared. It's too much of a coincidence, isn't it? Almost as if something or someone is guarding the church." The implication hung heavy in the air. If someone was guarding the church, if someone had deliberately put that creature there, it meant the mystery wasn't just about the bells or Elinor's parents. It was about a deliberate act, a conscious effort to keep secrets buried. They walked slowly back towards Elinor's home, the fog still thick around them, muffling the sounds of the town. The church bells, thankfully, had returned to their usual sporadic, mournful tolls, but the unsettling memory of their frantic ringing lingered. "We need to find out more about the incident at the church," Elinor said, breaking the silence. "The official story. It doesn't make sense. And my mother's journal, he knows." It suggests a person, not just a creature. Agreed, Thomas replied. The town records are notoriously sparse for that period, but I've got some old newspapers, local gazettes. They might have more details than the official archives. I'll start digging first thing tomorrow. He looked at her, his expression serious. But Elinor, we have to be careful. Whoever or whatever is guarding that church, it's dangerous. We can't go back in there without a plan. Elinor nodded, a grim determination setting in. I know. But I can't stop now. Not after finding Mama's journal. Not after tonight. The next morning, the sun struggled to break through the lingering mist, casting a pale, diffused light over Blackwood Creek. Elinor spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, unable to shake the image of the glowing eyes or the desperate warning in her mother's journal. Aunt Martha, noticing Elinor's unusually withdrawn demeanor, hovered with a heightened sense of concern. "You look troubled, dear," Martha observed during breakfast, her gaze sharp. "Did you sleep well? Those dreadful bells kept ringing through the night." Elinor forced a smile. "Just tired, Aunt, and the bells were particularly loud last night." She knew she couldn't tell her aunt about the church. Martha's already fragile nerves wouldn't be able to handle it. Later that afternoon, Elinor decided to visit Sarah, her closest friend, who lived just a few blocks away. Sarah was practical, down to earth, and possessed a healthy dose of skepticism, qualities Elinor desperately needed to anchor her in this spiraling investigation. She owned a small general store with her husband, a bustling hub of community life where gossip flowed as freely as conversation. She found Sarah behind the counter, weighing out flour for a customer. Sarah, with her quick wit and warm smile, was a stark contrast to Elinor's own often brooding nature. "Elinor, what a surprise. You look like you've seen a ghost." Elinor waited until the customer left, then lowered her voice. "Worse than a ghost, Sarah. I need to talk to you. Alone." They retired to the small back room of the store, a cluttered space filled with boxes and inventory. Elinor recounted everything, from finding her mother's journal to the harrowing encounter at the church the previous night. Sarah listened, her initial skepticism slowly replaced by a look of profound concern. "Glowing eyes," Sarah repeated, her eyebrows raised. "And a growl?" "Elinor, are you sure you weren't just startled? The fog can play tricks on your mind." "I'm sure, Sarah," Elinor insisted, her voice firm. "It was real, and the bells changed their pattern, just like Thomas said. It was like they were screaming." Sarah leaned back against a stack of crates, her arms crossed. "All right, suppose it was real. What does it mean? Someone put a wild animal in an abandoned church to guard. What, a hole in the wall?" "It's not just a hole," Elinor explained, her voice gaining urgency. "It's a patch of new plaster. My mother's journal mentioned the key. What if she was trying to tell us something was hidden there, something crucial to why she and Papa disappeared?" Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Elinor, this is getting dangerous. You're talking about an unknown creature, a possible cover-up. This isn't a game. You could get hurt." "I know," Elinor admitted, her voice softer. "But I have to know, Sarah. My parents, they just vanished. For 13 years I've lived with that uncertainty. This journal, these bells, they're telling me there's a truth to uncover. I can't abandon it now. Please, I need your help, your common sense, just to keep me grounded." Sarah looked at her friend, seeing the raw determination in Elinor's eyes. She knew Elinor wouldn't stop, not until she had answers. And despite her skepticism, a seed of doubt had been planted by Elinor's unwavering conviction and the sheer strangeness of the bell's behavior. "All right," Sarah said finally. "I'll help. But we do this smart, Elinor. No more sneaking into abandoned churches in the dead of night. We need information. And we need to figure out what that creature was." The offer of support, even tinged with caution, brought a wave of relief over Elinor. She wasn't alone anymore, with Thomas digging for historical clues and Sarah providing practical insight and a grounding presence. A plan, however nascent, was beginning to form. The mystery, dark and intimidating as it was, no longer felt insurmountable. The bells continued their melancholy toll, but now, instead of solely inspiring dread, they seemed to beckon, promising that the truth was within reach, hidden just beyond the oppressive fog and whispers of Blackwood Creek. The next few days were a blur of intense research and hushed conversations. Thomas, true to his word, immersed himself in the dusty archives of the town library. He emerged with a stack of old Blackwood Creek gazettes, their pages brittle with age, detailing local news from the early 1900s. Meanwhile, Sarah, using her network at the general store, subtly probed the older residents, carefully avoiding direct questions about the church, but listening intently to any anecdotes or rumors that surfaced. Elinor focused on her mother's journal, scrutinizing every word, every sketch. She noticed a recurring symbol in the margins, a crudely drawn bell with a jagged crack running through it. It appeared on several pages, often near entries that seemed particularly significant or unsettling. What did it mean? A warning? A clue? One afternoon, Thomas arrived at Elinor's house, his face grim, a thick pile of newspapers tucked under his arm. "I've found something," he announced, dropping the papers onto the parlor table. "It's not pretty." He spread out a particularly yellowed edition, dated the day after Elinor's parents disappeared. The headline screamed, "Tragedy at Blackwood Creek Church. Congregation vanishes in unexplained incident." The article detailed the official account: a fire during a Sunday service, causing the church to collapse and the entire congregation, including Elinor's parents, to perish. But a smaller, almost hidden paragraph caught Elinor's eye. It mentioned witnesses reporting strange sounds emanating from the belfry immediately prior to the incident, described as a metallic grinding and a frantic pealing, unlike any bell ringing heard before. "A fire?" Elinor scoffed, pointing to the line. "But there's no evidence of a fire. The church wasn't burned, it was structurally compromised, as if something exploded from within or imploded, and no bodies were ever found, not a single trace." "Exactly," Thomas said, his finger tracing a sentence in another article. "And look at this." From a few days later, local authorities confirm no signs of arson. Cause of structural collapse remains undetermined. Investigation ongoing. But then, the investigation was abruptly closed a week later, no explanation given. It's almost as if someone wanted the official story to be fire, regardless of the evidence. The pieces were slowly beginning to connect, forming a chilling picture of a deliberate cover-up. "What about my mother's journal?" Elinor pressed. "Did you find anything about 'he knows' or 'the key'?" Thomas shook his head. "Nothing direct. But I did find several articles about a reclusive old man named Silas Thorne. He lived in a remote cabin on the outskirts of Blackwood Creek, known for his eccentric behavior and his obsession with the church. He was a bell maker by trade, an expert in old mechanisms. He vanished shortly after the incident, never to be seen again. The papers dismissed it as him going off the grid, as was his custom. But it's peculiar, isn't it?" Elinor felt a jolt. A bell maker. An obsession with the church. Vanished. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Silas Thorne," she repeated, the name tasting strange on her tongue. Could he be the he my mother mentioned? Did he have a key? Just then Sarah arrived, her face flushed from the cold. "I've been talking to old Mrs. Gable," she announced. "She used to work for the Thorne family decades ago. She said Silas was a genius, but a strange one. He spent all his time tinkering with contraptions, especially clockwork and bells. And she mentioned something about him being very secretive about a master key that could control all the bells in the valley, not just the churches." Elinor and Thomas exchanged a look. "A master key," Elinor breathed. "That has to be it." My mother wasn't talking about a key to a door, but a key to a mechanism, a way to control the bells. But why would he be controlling the church bells? Thomas pondered. And what does it have to do with the disappearance of the congregation? The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken questions. The bells, ringing faintly in the distance, seemed to mock their lack of answers. The mystery was deepening, weaving a complex web of events, individuals, and hidden motives. And what about the creature? Sarah pressed, her gaze hardening. The one guarding the church. Was that part of Silas Thorne's eccentric behavior? Thomas consulted his newspapers again. There are a few reports from the time about strange animal sightings in the woods near the church, described as large and unusually aggressive, dismissed as folklore by the authorities. Folklore, or a deliberate misdirection? Elinor countered, remembering the glowing eyes. Silas Thorne, a bell maker living in a remote cabin known for tinkering, obsessed with the church, vanishes. And a creature, possibly trained, guarding the church. It all seems to fit. The realization settled over them like a cold shroud. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a meticulously planned operation. But to what end? What secret was so monumental that it required a mass disappearance, a fabricated fire, and a monstrous guardian? We need to find Silas Thorne's cabin, Elinor declared, a new resolve hardening her features. If he had a master key, he might have other journals, other clues. And if he was involved in what happened at the church, we need to know why. Sarah, despite her earlier skepticism, felt a prickle of unease. The casual gossip she'd gathered now seemed to align with a more sinister narrative. Finding his cabin won't be easy, she warned. It's deep in the woods, practically uncharted territory. And if he's the he your mother mentioned, who knows? What if he's still out there? What if he's the one who put that creature in the church? The thought sent a shiver down Elinor's spine. The idea that Silas Thorne, a man who had vanished 13 years ago, could still be alive, still manipulating events, was chilling. But it also provided a tangible target for their investigation, a potential source of answers. The bells, ringing their steady, melancholic tune, now seemed to whisper a name: Silas Thorne. And the whispers were no longer just a distant echo. They were growing louder, drawing them deeper into the heart of Blackwood Creek's darkest secret. The sense of foreboding intensified. The weight of the past was pressing down on them, demanding to be unburdened. Remember to subscribe to the channel to follow Elinor's journey into the chilling mystery of Blackwood Creek. This is a fictional story. The journey to Silas Thorne's cabin was arduous. Thomas, armed with a compass and a faded hand-drawn map he'd found in the library's forgotten archives, led Elinor and Sarah through the dense, unforgiving Vermont woods. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the canopy of trees overhead created a perpetual twilight, even at midday. The bells of Blackwood Creek Church, though distant, were still faintly audible, their persistent tolling a constant, unnerving reminder of their purpose. They navigated through thick underbrush, over moss-covered rocks, and across shallow streams. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them, its silence punctuated only by the rustle of unseen creatures and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Sarah, usually so composed, found herself constantly scanning the shadows, a nervous energy radiating from her. "Are you sure this is the way, Thomas?" Sarah whispered, swatting at a persistent fly. "It feels like we're walking into nowhere." "The map is old, but it's precise," Thomas replied, consulting the brittle parchment. Silas Thorne was known for his reclusive nature. He didn't want to be found. After hours of relentless trekking, a faint wisp of smoke curling above the trees signaled their proximity. Through a break in the foliage they saw it, a small, dilapidated cabin, almost swallowed by the surrounding wilderness. It was built of rough-hewn logs, its windows dark and uninviting like vacant eyes. A narrow, overgrown path led to the rickety front door, which hung slightly ajar. A wave of unease washed over Elinor. The cabin radiated a chilling stillness, as if time itself had forgotten this place. The faint metallic clang of the bells seemed to intensify as they approached, their rhythm now eerily specific. 3 quick tolls, followed by a pause, then a single resonant strike. It was a pattern, Elinor realized with a jolt, that she had heard before, specifically on the day her parents disappeared. "He's not here," Sarah whispered, her voice laced with a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. "It's completely abandoned." But as they drew closer, a faint, rhythmic clink, clink, clink emerged from within the cabin, almost imperceptible beneath the distant bells. It was the sound of metal on metal, a delicate, repetitive motion, like clockwork. "Someone is here," Elinor breathed, her heart pounding. Thomas held up a hand, motioning for silence. They approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the soft moss underfoot. The front door creaked open further with a gentle push, revealing an interior shrouded in dust and cobwebs. The clinking sound was louder now, leading them deeper into the cabin. The single room was cluttered with tools, gears, springs, and intricate metallic contraptions, a bell maker's workshop frozen in time. Drawings of complex mechanisms adorned the walls, alongside diagrams of bell towers and intricate clockwork designs. The scent of old metal and oil hung heavy in the air. In the center of the room, illuminated by a sliver of light filtering through a grimy window, stood a workbench. And on the workbench, a small, intricate mechanism was slowly, rhythmically rotating, its tiny gears clinking. It was a miniaturized version of a bell tower, complete with tiny, perfectly crafted bells. And those bells were ringing, their delicate chimes mirroring the pattern of the church bells outside. "It's a working model," Thomas whispered in awe. "He built a miniature church, a replica of Blackwood Creek Church, even down to the bells, and it's running itself." Elinor's gaze fell upon a leather-bound book lying open beside the model. It was a journal, larger and thicker than her mother's, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. The cover read, "Silas Thorne's Bell Harmonics and Chronologies." As Elinor reached for the journal, a sudden guttural growl erupted from the shadows in the corner of the room. All 3 of them froze, their eyes darting towards the sound. From the darkness, a form began to coalesce. A large, powerful dog, its fur matted and dark, its eyes glowing with the same eerie yellow light they had seen at the church. It was unmistakably the same creature. The dog lunged, a low snarl rumbling in its chest. Thomas instinctively pushed Elinor and Sarah behind him, grabbing a heavy wrench from the workbench. "Back away!" he yelled, his voice strained. Elinor's mind raced. This creature wasn't just guarding the church, it was guarding Silas Thorne's cabin. This wasn't a wild animal, it was trained. And Silas Thorne was definitely involved. The dog circled them, its movements fluid and predatory, its eyes fixed on Elinor. The clinking of the miniature bells on the workbench continued, eerily detached from the escalating tension. "The journal," Elinor gasped, pointing to it. "Silas's journal. It has to have the answers." Thomas, holding the wrench defensively, feinted towards the dog, drawing its attention. "Go, I'll distract it." Sarah, her face pale but resolute, grabbed Elinor's arm. "We have to go, now." But Elinor resisted. "No, we came all this way. I need that journal." As the dog prepared to lunge again, a loud metallic clang echoed from outside, the Blackwood Creek church bells striking a single booming note, incredibly loud, as if it were right outside the cabin. The sound was so unexpected, so jarring, that the dog flinched, its attention momentarily diverted. Seizing the opportunity, Elinor darted forward, snatched Silas Thorne's journal from the workbench, and sprinted back towards the door. The dog recovered quickly, letting out a frustrated bark, and lunged after her. Thomas grabbed Sarah's hand, and they bolted out of the cabin, the dog hot on their heels. They crashed through the underbrush, the dog's growls a terrifying soundtrack to their frantic escape. They could hear it snapping at their heels, its breath hot on their necks. They ran blindly, desperate to put distance between themselves and the creature. Just when they thought they couldn't run any further, they burst out of the dense forest into a small, rocky clearing. The dog, suddenly hesitant, stopped at the tree line, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It let out a frustrated whine, then, to their surprise, turned and retreated back into the woods, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. They stood panting, trembling, the cold sweat of fear mingling with the exertion of their flight. The bells of Blackwood Creek, still ringing in the distance, seemed to welcome them, a stark contrast to the terror they had just endured. Elinor clutched Silas Thorne's journal tightly to her chest. They had the key. Now, they just had to unlock its secrets. The chilling encounter had reaffirmed their suspicions. Silas Thorne was not merely a reclusive craftsman, he was at the heart of the mystery, and the creature was his chilling instrument. The true horror of Blackwood Creek was just beginning to unfold. Safe back in Elinor's parlor, the three of them huddled around Silas Thorne's journal, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air still hummed with the aftershocks of their terrifying encounter. The journal was bound in dark, weathered leather, its pages filled with intricate diagrams, mathematical equations, and dense, methodical handwriting. It was clearly the work of a brilliant, albeit disturbed mind. Elinor carefully turned the brittle pages, her fingers tracing Silas's elegant script. The initial entries detailed his passion for bell-making, his theories on resonance, and his fascination with the Blackwood Creek church bells, which he considered a masterpiece of engineering. He meticulously recorded their various tones, their harmonic frequencies, and the subtle ways atmospheric pressure affected their sound. Then, the entries shifted. A chilling obsession began to emerge. Silas started detailing a theory about the resonance of collective fear. He believed that intense human emotion, particularly fear and panic, could create a measurable energy, a vibrational frequency. He theorized that if this energy could be amplified, harnessed, and transmitted through sound, specifically through the powerful vibrations of the church bells, it could have profound, even physically destructive effects. Thomas, his eyes wide, pointed to a complex diagram. He wasn't just building bells, he was building a sound weapon. Look at this. These calculations for resonant frequencies, they're designed to induce vertigo, disorientation, even structural collapse if the frequency is precisely matched with the target material. Sarah, who had been listening in growing horror, gasped. He was trying to use the bells to destroy the church. Elinor's blood ran cold. Not destroy. To make it seem like it collapsed. To create chaos. To make people disappear without a trace. She pointed to a passage where Silas mused about the perfect frequency to disintegrate organic matter. He talks about creating a resonance field within the church during a service when the concentration of people would be at its highest. The terror, the panic, it would all feed the resonance. The horrifying truth began to dawn on them. The incident at the church wasn't an accident. It was a meticulously planned experiment, a horrifying culmination of Silas Thorne's twisted genius. The church bells, ringing erratically, were not calling for help. They were instruments of destruction. "But why?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would he do something so monstrous?" Elinor flipped through more pages, her eyes scanning for answers. She found a series of entries detailing Silas's growing disillusionment with the town, its hypocrisy, and what he perceived as its suffocating small-mindedness. He harbored a deep-seated resentment, particularly towards the church elders, whom he accused of exploiting the community's faith for personal gain. There were also vague, paranoid ramblings about those who seek to control the unseen forces, suggesting a warped perception of secret societies or hidden powers within Blackwood Creek. He believed the church was a symbol of this perceived oppression, and its destruction, along with its congregation, would be a cleansing. He was trying to expose what he saw as the town's true nature, Elinor said, her voice heavy with sorrow. He saw himself as a visionary, a liberator, even if it meant becoming a monster. Thomas, meanwhile, was meticulously examining one of Silas's diagrams. "And the creature," he murmured. He called it Cerberus. He detailed his experiments in animal conditioning, using specific bell patterns to train it, to make it fiercely loyal, and to respond to certain frequencies. He used it to guard his work, and later, the church, ensuring no one interfered with his twisted legacy. Elinor's eyes fell upon a final, chilling entry, dated the day of her parents' disappearance. "The resonance is complete. The harvest is ready. They will understand now. The key is within the heart of the machine. Only then will the truth be revealed, and the bells will continue to sing my triumph." "The key is within the heart of the machine," Elinor repeated, her voice hollow. He wasn't talking about a physical key anymore. He was talking about the mechanism itself. The bells, the source of the continuous ringing. If we can silence them, we can find out what happened, what he meant by the harvest and the truth. But how did the bells continue to ring for 13 years if Silas Thorne was gone? Thomas pointed to a complex section of Silas's diagrams, detailing a self-sustaining clockwork mechanism, powered by atmospheric pressure and ambient vibrations. He designed a perpetual motion device, or as close as he could get to one. It's connected directly to the bell mechanism. It's what's keeping the bells ringing, a monument to his madness. The revelation brought a new wave of dread. Silas Thorne hadn't just vanished. He had orchestrated a mass disappearance, a horrifying act of domestic terrorism, and then disappeared, leaving behind a chilling, self-perpetuating legacy. The bells were not a call for help from the lost, but a defiant, mocking celebration of his grotesque achievement. "So to get to the truth, to find out what happened to my parents, we have to silence the bells," Elinor concluded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We have to disable that mechanism, but the church, it's still guarded." Sarah, who had been quiet, her face etched with horror, finally spoke. "The creature. And if Silas Thorne is truly gone, who is controlling it now?" A profound silence descended upon the parlor, broken only by the distant, haunting toll of the bells. The terrifying reality of their situation pressed in on them. They were up against a brilliant, deranged mind, a self-sustaining device, and a dangerous, trained beast. And somewhere, within the ruined church, lay the answer to a 13-year-old mystery, and perhaps the fate of Elinor's parents. The very air seemed to thicken with a growing sense of urgency and dread, as if the past was slowly bleeding into the present, demanding its due. The realization that they were pursuing not just a mystery, but a tangible, malevolent force, weighed heavily on their shoulders. Remember to subscribe to the channel to follow Elinor's journey into the chilling mystery of Blackwood Creek. This is a fictional story. The decision was clear. They had to return to the church, not just to silence the bells, but to uncover the truth. Silas Thorne's journal had mapped his madness, but the fate of the disappeared lay hidden within the ruins. Facing a mechanical device and a trained animal, rather than a spectral entity, offered a grim sense of control. Their plan was meticulous. Thomas would disable the bell mechanism. Sarah would distract Cerberus, the terrifying dog. Elinor, armed with both journals, would seek final clues about the congregation's fate. They chose late afternoon, as dusk settled, for their approach. The cold, biting wind carried the incessant clang of the bells, deepening their dread as they neared the church. "All right," Thomas whispered. "Sarah, distract Cerberus with the meat we brought. Keep it away from Elinor and me while we get to the belfry." Sarah, pale but determined, nodded, clutching a sack of pungent cured meats. Elinor's heart hammered. This was the culmination of 13 years of unanswered questions. They slipped through the main doors, their cautious footsteps echoing in the desolate nave. The silence between the bells' tolls felt menacing. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. Cerberus, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on them. "Now, Sarah," Elinor hissed. Sarah quickly threw a piece of meat across the nave. The dog, driven by instinct, bounded after it, giving them a crucial window. Sarah continued throwing meat, drawing the creature further away. "Go!" Thomas urged, pulling Elinor towards the belfry trapdoor. He pried open the heavily barred door with a crowbar, revealing a dark shaft. "I'll go first," he said, scrambling up the rickety ladder. Elinor followed, the bell's clang growing deafening, vibrating through the structure. They emerged into the open belfry, the air cold and thick with metal and droppings. The massive bronze bells hung, poised to strike. At the center, Silas Thorne's heart of the machine, the complex perpetual motion device, hummed with a low mechanical whir. This twisted masterpiece had kept the bells ringing for 13 years. Thomas, grim-faced, immediately began working. He deftly examined the intricate mechanism, tracing connections while the chaotic symphony of the bells roared around them. He identified the main drive gear. "This is it. If I can disable this, the whole thing stops." Elinor scanned the belfry, recalling Silas's journal. "The key is within the heart of the machine, and the truth revealed." There had to be more. Agitated barking from below warned that Cerberus was growing impatient. As Thomas meticulously unbolted plates, revealing more clockwork, Elinor noticed a loose stone in the belfry wall, half hidden by a chain. Its irregular shape, reminiscent of her mother's journal sketch of a cracked bell, caught her eye. Was this the key? With trembling hands, Elinor pried the stone loose with a trowel. Behind it, a thin, almost invisible wire disappeared into the masonry, emitting a faint hum. "Thomas, look!" she yelled over the deafening bells. "This wire." Suddenly, the furious bells began to slow, their rhythm erratic, then stuttered, and with a final mournful clang, fell silent. The abrupt quiet was deafening. Thomas stood, wrench in hand, a look of triumph and exhaustion on his face. He had silenced the bells. The silence was eerie, suffocating. But in that quiet, a terrifying new sound emerged, Cerberus's frantic, angry barking, now unchecked. The creature was coming. "The wire, Thomas," Elinor urged, pointing. "What is it?" Thomas approached, leaning closer. "It's a tripwire, perhaps, or a trigger." As he spoke, a low, grinding sound emanated from deeper within the wall. A section of stone slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. A chilling, stagnant air wafted out, carrying the metallic scent Elinor recognized. This wasn't just a hidden passage. It was a crypt, a tomb, and the source of the terrible truth Silas Thorne had promised. The air grew heavy with unseen horrors, the silence amplifying their pounding hearts. The newly revealed passage was a chilling black void, radiating profound cold and stagnation. The acrid metallic scent intensified, and Cerberus's enraged barks reverberated up the belfry shaft. They had only moments. "What is this place?" Sarah's strained voice echoed from below. She appeared at the trapdoor, dirt-streaked and clutching a bloodied stick. "It's relentless. I can't hold it back much longer." "A hidden passage," Elinor yelled down. Thomas silenced the bells. "Amazing," Sarah replied, but her focus remained on the growls. Thomas, lantern in hand, peered into the passage. Too narrow to walk upright, a crawl space, and it smells terrible. "It must lead somewhere important," Elinor insisted, recalling Silas's "truth will be revealed." "My mother's key." It pointed here. A magnetic pull drew her towards the passage. "I'll go," Elinor declared, resolute. "I need to know." "No, Elinor, it's too dangerous," Thomas countered, grabbing her arm. "We don't know what's in there." But Elinor shook her head. "My parents were at that service. This is my fight. You stay here and keep an eye on the entrance. Sarah, buy us more time." Before they could argue, Elinor dropped to her hands and knees, squeezing into the cramped passage. The lantern illuminated only a few feet, showing rough stone walls and a dusty, uneven floor. The air was thick, suffocating, the metallic smell now overwhelming, laced with a faint, cloying sweetness. She crawled forward, her breath rasping, heart thumping. The passage wound deeper, growing colder. After an eternity, it opened into a small, subterranean chamber. Elinor pushed herself upright, her legs aching. The sight sickened her. The circular chamber's damp walls glowed faintly. In the center, a large, circular indentation in the stone floor was surrounded by intricate carvings. Within it, in a grotesque pile, lay scattered personal effects: a locket, a single shoe, a pocket watch, a broken spectacles frame. These were not random. They were the vanished congregation's belongings, fused into the stone as if by unimaginable heat and pressure. The air, thick with that cloying metallic sweetness, made Elinor's stomach lurch. It was the smell of oxidized iron, old, desiccated blood. Silas Thorne's disintegration wasn't theory, it was horrific reality. The bodies hadn't burned. They had been atomized by resonant frequency, their essence imprinted on the stone. This was the harvest Silas had described. The church was a macabre tomb, a monument to scientific cruelty. Elinor stumbled back, fighting nausea. Her parents. This was what happened to them. Not disappearance, but calculated horror. Then she noticed a small tarnished silver locket on a stone pedestal. Her mother's locket. Inside, a tiny photograph of her smiling parents and a small, folded note. She unfolded it with shaking hands. "Elinor, my dear girl, if you find this, Silas is mad. He believes frequencies amplify fear. He's done something unthinkable. He plans to escape through the tunnels beneath. The key, not just to the bells, it's to his escape route. Find the second key, the one that opens the path to the outside. He's going to hide it with his last, greatest work. Don't follow, just expose the truth. I love you, Mama." Elinor's eyes blurred. Her mother, an investigator to the end, left clues. Silas's key is within the heart of the machine, now held a terrifying new meaning, a second key for his escape, hidden in his perpetual motion device. He hadn't vanished, he'd planned his escape. He was still out there. A loud crash echoed from the passage behind her, followed by frantic growls. Cerberus. It had found its way in. Elinor scrambled back, clutching the locket and note. Her mother's warning: don't follow, just expose the truth. But if Silas was alive, the danger was far from over. A second key, a final puzzle piece, remained hidden. The possibility of him being alive sent a fresh, absolute wave of terror. Blackwood Creek's true villain was a living madman, and the chilling reality of his atrocity fueled a desperate need for justice. Elinor burst into the belfry, gasping. Thomas and Sarah fought Cerberus, which had scaled the ladder. The snarling dog lunged, its glowing eyes fixed on Elinor. Sarah wielded a crowbar, while Thomas used an overturned bench. "He's alive!" Elinor shrieked. "Silas Thorne! He escaped! My mother said he has a second key, hidden with his last, greatest work." Thomas, stunned, faltered, letting Cerberus gain ground. The dog lunged, teeth bared, narrowly missing Sarah. "The perpetual motion device," Elinor yelled, pointing at the now silent mechanism. "That's his last greatest work. The second key must be inside." Thomas sprang into action. He dodged Cerberus, scrambling to the clockwork. Sarah, with desperate energy, swung the crowbar, hitting Cerberus's side. The dog yelped, momentarily off balance. Thomas, hands shaking, examined the device. The belfry's silence, broken by growls and ragged breaths, amplified every metallic clink. He searched for a hidden latch. Elinor watched Cerberus, ready to warn them. The dog was relentless, an extension of Silas Thorne's twisted will. Suddenly, Thomas shouted, "I found it! A hidden compartment!" He pulled out a small, ornate silver key from the main drive shaft. This was her mother's second key. As Thomas held it up, Cerberus, sensing their success, let out a furious high-pitched growl, vibrating through them. It tensed, preparing a final, desperate lunge. "It's going for Elinor," Sarah screamed, pushing Elinor behind her. Thomas tossed the key to Elinor. "Take it, get out, I'll hold it off." Elinor hesitated. Her mother's words echoed, "Don't follow, just expose the truth." The key was the truth. As Cerberus sprang, Elinor had a desperate thought. Silas's journal mentioned conditioning Cerberus with specific bell patterns. The miniature bell model. What if the bell's original chaotic pattern was a command to stop? "Thomas, Sarah, retreat to the ladder. I have an idea," Elinor yelled. As Cerberus leaped, Elinor sprinted to the silent bell mechanism. She grabbed the main drive wheel, twisting it frantically. A jarring, grinding sound ripped through the belfry. The bells shuddered, then let out a single distorted clang, followed by a chaotic, jumbled ringing. Cerberus, midair, yelped, disoriented. Its glowing eyes flickered, dimmed. It crashed to the floor, whimpering, convulsing. The discordant ringing was breaking its conditioning. "It's working," Thomas shouted, "but it's damaging the mechanism." Elinor kept twisting the wheel, the painful clanging echoing. Cerberus writhed, its growls turning to whimpers. Suddenly a loud snap echoed, and Elinor felt searing pain. A piece of metal sheared off, cutting her palm. She cried out, releasing the wheel. The bells, with a final dying clang, fell silent. Cerberus lay still, breathing shallowly. Its eyes were a dull yellow, devoid of malice. It was a broken creature, a victim of Silas Thorne's experiments. Thomas rushed to Elinor, examining her bleeding hand. "You're hurt, but you did it. You stopped it." Elinor looked at the key, then at the defeated creature. Her hand throbbed, but grim satisfaction mingled with sadness. They had silenced the bells and neutralized the Guardian. But Silas Thorne, the true threat, was still at large. The key in her hand was for his escape route and the means to finally bring him to justice, closing Blackwood Creek's dark chapter. The belfry, once menacing, now held the heavy weight of their grim discovery and the chilling reality of the true villain. With Cerberus incapacitated, Thomas quickly bandaged Elinor's hand. The belfry's silence was profound, unsettling yet liberating. "We have the key," Elinor said, clutching the silver key. "He escaped. My mother's note said he'd hide it with his last greatest work, and it opens the path to the outside." Thomas examined the key. "It's for a hidden mechanism, very specific." He looked at the wall where Elinor found the crypt wire. "What if there's another entrance within that passage?" Elinor nodded. "It makes sense. He built a system of hidden tunnels. The crypt was part of a larger network." Sarah, recovering, said, "We follow the trail. This key leads to his escape route, and that leads to him." Descending the belfry ladder, they re-entered the nave. The silence was eerie, broken only by creaking timbers and the lingering scent of decay. They returned to the crypt passage. With the silver key, Thomas found a tiny, almost invisible keyhole in the rough stone. The key turned with a soft click, and a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing another dark, narrow tunnel. Fresh air drifted from within. "This is it," Elinor breathed, a mix of apprehension and grim satisfaction. This was Silas Thorne's escape route from 13 years ago. The tunnel sloped downwards, growing colder and damper. Silence was absolute, broken only by their footsteps and dripping water. After several minutes, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber, similar to the crypt but empty of horrors. In the center, under a flickering lantern, was a crude wooden table. On it lay brittle documents, a rusted pistol, and a small, open, leather-bound journal. Thomas cautiously approached, picking up the loaded pistol. Elinor reached for the journal. Its cover was blank, but the first page held Silas Thorne's shaky script, his final testament. They were fools, blinded by their faith, their petty squabbles. They deserved their fate. The resonance cleansed them. But the world, it is not ready. Not yet. I leave this. Proof. A warning. The cycle will continue. The bells will be silenced, but the fear, it remains. I have found my true sanctuary, where the echoes of their terror can never reach me. The final key. Not a physical one. It is the understanding that some truths are too terrible to bear, and the only escape is silence. My silence. Elinor's blood ran cold. His silence. She scanned the chamber. A small, natural fissure in the wall, too small for a man to squeeze through, appeared behind the table. Thomas, reading over her shoulder, followed her gaze. His true sanctuary. The final key. Silence. He looked at the crack. Elinor. It's suicide. He didn't escape somewhere. He escaped into death. A profound anticlimax, mingled with chilling understanding, washed over Elinor. Silas Thorne hadn't vanished to live in hiding. He completed his monstrous experiment, then retreated to his ultimate sanctuary, death. The narrow crack suggested he forced himself into it, perhaps causing a collapse behind him, ensuring no one could follow, not even to retrieve his body. The documents on the table were horrifyingly precise accounts of the church incident, detailing victims and the exact frequencies used for resonance. They included unsettling sketches of terrified faces. This was his proof, the validation of his twisted theory. Elinor felt a wave of profound sorrow for her parents and all victims, their lives extinguished by a madman. A deep, unsettling fear remained. Silas Thorne was gone, but his dark legacy, his twisted philosophy lingered. The horror he unleashed was chillingly human. He wanted the truth revealed, Elinor murmured, clutching the documents. This is it, the truth about the bells, about Blackwood Creek, about my parents. She held the documents, eyes fixed on the empty crack. No dramatic confrontation. The monster was dead, but the evidence of his atrocities remained. As they emerged from the church, the sun set, painting the sky in orange and purple. The air was crisp and clear, free of fog. And the bells, haunting and persistent, were finally, irrevocably silent. Blackwood Creek would no longer be terrorized by their ghostly chimes. Elinor looked at Thomas and Sarah, her unlikely allies. They had faced fear and danger, uncovering a chilling truth that would shake Blackwood Creek. The town, once defined by its secrets, now faced its darkest chapter. Elinor, no longer haunted by an unknown past, was now a woman, scarred but resolute, armed with the knowledge to bring grim peace to the echoes of Blackwood Creek. The silence that fell over the valley was not just absence of sound, but the heavy weight of a secret laid bare, demanding justice for the lost. Remember to subscribe to the channel and join our community. This is a fictional story,